Hi, everybody. Welcome to XS Exceed. I'm Gearface. This is the show where I've trapped an expert. I've tricked them into sitting down with me and teaching me an Exceed character. And my today's victim, teacher, is Rose, and she's here to discuss Dan with me. Um, Rose, thank you so much for being on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Hello, everyone in the audience. Um,
Um, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, you.
Oh, I was just going to say, before we get started, there's a quick disclaimer that we like to issue that we're going to be talking about strategy in this conversation kind of prescriptively. This is always correct. This is always incorrect. Always do this. Never do this, etc. Um, the Exceed's not a solved game. Uh, this is these are the rules of Rose's strategy on Dan. They don't have to be your rules, and they probably shouldn't be if you don't find them interesting or cool. Um, Please play in the way that you do find interesting or cool. And if you find success with with that strategy that we didn't talk about, uh, tell me about it. I would love to hear about alternative perspectives on how to play Dan. Um, and
And make yeah. In addition to that, we are also going to be trying to. We're playing to win, but Dan in particular is like a really good character to play not to win, to just play to do something really funny.
right,
And one of the things I like about Dan in particular is I can bring out Dan, one of my mains, against a new player, and I can have a really enjoyable game because I can control how hard at any moment I'm trying to win. And Dan is silly enough. Your opponent doesn't know. You could be doing really stupid stuff and be playing really seriously, or you could be playing really not seriously and look really serious.
sure. That's actually a really good point. That Exceed is fun. Exceed can be for fun. We're playing to win here, and there's some cross pollination between these two schools of thought, but uh, Dan in particular can kind of skirt that line. So that's an excellent point. So yeah, with all that said, with that kind of bookkeeping out of the way, Rose, please take it away. Tell me about this weird pink geed loser man. I want to know about Dan.
All right. So the first thing about Dan, let's just start with his character card because this is his ability.
Sure.
Most he has your wild swings have critical, +1 power and +1 speed. Um, should I go over what critical is, or just
Uh,
like
sure. Yeah, I mean, critical is a season 3 mechanic that says you can spend one force from gauge uh, to have this effect. So uh, all of
Dan does
Dan's
not have critical?
cards, yes, none of Dan's cards have the critical text on them, but yes, they do. They're just on his character ability, and they're specifically for his wild swings instead.
Yep.
Is that a fair assessment of what criticals are?
Yep.
Okay,
Thank you.
of course.
So this ability is really strong. I'm going to be pulling up some other. Just like here is a character with a very similar ability, and this ability alone makes him incredibly scary at range 1.
Yeah,
Dan has that all the time if you're willing to wild swing. If you're at range 1 as Dan against frontside Zangief, he has the advantage because of the shape of his kit, but he doesn't have that big of the advantage.
right.
As long as you're wild swinging, of course. You can't. No plans here allowed. This is Dan.
Right, this is Dan, of course.
But yeah, what we'll be going over is like how to make a plan out of no plans allowed.
Right. Yeah. To me,
So
that is kind of the most interesting tension about Dan. That he is the I don't know kind of YOLO whatever what like let it lay kind of character, but he might not be able to consistently win a strike, but he can consistently win a game. Um,
exactly.
and
Yep.
that's fascinating to me that he can do that.
So that's his ability. He has an exceed side. For the purposes of what we're talking about here, this doesn't exist, unfortunately. Um, I'll go over why later when we have like a little more context.
Sure.
But for now, yes, frontside Dan is where we're at. The rest of his kit, we have 3 ultras, 4 specials. I think he's the first character in Exceed to have this distribution. Don't quote me on that.
Definitely the first that we've
But
talked about on this show. Normally it's 5 and 2.
yep,
So he has an extra copy of, or an extra set of 2 copies of an ultra.
yep. And that helps with his wild swing consistency, because one of the things you can do is when you wild swing an Ultra, you can invalidate it.
Right. Okay. So
Um,
you can filter through more of your deck for the option that you might actually be looking for.
exactly.
Okay.
So Dan's Ultras are great. We're about to get to this one. Dan's Ultras are great. You're not going to be invalidating them too often, but it's a nice option to have,
Okay.
for sure. So let's start with Legendary Taunt, because this card is legendary in Exceed. This is a 2-gauge Ultra. It says win the strike, basically.
Okay.
Before advance up to 3, you may draw a card, then you may play and execute another attack from your hand.
Okay. And so
So,
this is a zero range, zero power on
yeah,
curve, I guess, effect, but you're setting positioning and
yeah,
armoring through whatever your opponent's gonna do, and now you're in a new position to hit them again.
pretty much.
Okay.
So like the whole central structure of Exceed, right, is you set your attack face down, I set my attack face down, because every attack, unless you have like a lot of stats boosted, has something it loses to.
Right.
And Legendary Taunt mostly just says, okay, look at your opponent's attack and now play whatever beats it.
Oh, it's an option select.
Yep.
Okay, so they don't get the chance to put another card down. You just play another card on top of this that beats what they already played.
Exactly.
Okay, I
And
see.
so the really traditional one is just Spike. Like, you play this, they've played anything slower than it, okay, they lose.
Right. And because
And
you get to set positioning first as well.
yes, exactly. There's actually
Gotcha.
some really interesting like micro decisions when you do this. Like, do I want the order of the card's text is important. You advance first, then you draw, then you play another attack. So you might have to, in desperate situations, like, I'm going to advance to this position and then draw, and I need to think about where I want to go because I really hope this card I'm drawing is the one I want.
Right.
But generally, this card is so strong that, like, you don't need to play it without a plan. You can just wait for next strike and play it and win. If there's a chance this card is going to lose, I just don't play it.
Right.
And the main way that happens is if you're defending at range 3. Because dive, it's pretty fast. It's quite fast for the amount of defenses it has.
Definitely. Yeah.
Anything faster than it is not going to stun it.
Right. And I was like, so Spike, for example, is speed 4. Or sorry, is speed 3. So you're outspeeding that. And if you're defending with this, you know that they're playing an EX attacker doing preemptive strike or
Exactly.
something like that. You are always able to say, no, you know what? I get to just I pick the terms of this strike.
Yep. I do like attacking with it sometimes, so you do have to take a little risk they'll play an EX, but yeah, if you're not at range 3, defending with it is almost always safe.
Okay.
Yeah. The boost is one of those things that, like, if you're not playing Dan super seriously, this is a very funny boost because you can just say, okay, I'm boosting this. Let's draw one of these next 2 ultras. Guess which one is in my hand, and if you guess wrong, you're going to get hit for 7.
Okay. And the only reason that you're not necessarily playing it as a boost in a serious game is that Legendary Taunt is bonkers.
That and Dan is actually pretty interesting economy-wise. We'll get into that a little more with the next ultras again, but Dan has rewards for going really low on hand, but like every character, having options in hand is strong.
Right.
And you don't have anything in your kit that will get you a bunch of cards when you need them. You have to prepare slowly back up.
Right.
Or change cards.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
And with how strong his ultras are, you're hungry for that gauge. And
exactly.
And your crit is necessary for your character to even be a character. So the economy might be kind of tight.
Exactly.
Okay.
The ultras do have some text to help with it. Both of these ultras have some similar things going on. They're 3 gauge instead of Legendary Taunt's 2 gauge, but they both say if you have no cards in your hand, ignore this card's gauge cost.
Okay.
So that's the reward I was just mentioning about going down to an empty hand.
Okay. And obviously this is after you've played the card is when this checks. So I have 1 card in my hand, it's Haugadoken, I put it down, I have 0 cards in hand.
Exactly.
It now has 0 gauge cost.
Exactly. And this is actually the reason Legendary Taunt says you may draw a card.
Oh, okay. So
Yes.
if I have one card in hand, I'm sorry, if I have two cards in hand and it's Legendary Taunt and How Godoken, I
Yeah,
put down Legendary Taunt, I set the range for How Godoken, I don't draw a card. This is now a free Ultra.
exactly. Yep.
Got
So
it.
it costs you 2 gauge to do this nonsense. 7 damage at speed 4 with a bunch of guard, with controlling the range. They can't hit you, probably.
Probably, right. Interesting.
Yep.
Okay.
So,
And similar interactions with a different outcome with
yeah, for Chicho.
with this, which is with Shiso, which is like an on curve. It's a super assault, it looks like.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
And yeah, since we're already like talking about exactly why, this is why you don't exceed as Dan. Dan's Exceed is another like very funny. I've managed to find an opportunity to do this in tournament once. It was like very niche. I feel like maybe it was right. I have no idea.
Right.
But your Exceed says, okay, for the rest of the game, I can just sit on one card in my hand, and I can sit on 0 cards in my hand for the rest of the game if I really want to. I can just
Right.
stand here and say, do you think I drew an altar this turn? Do you think it's on top of my deck? And you have to just be afraid of that the whole time.
Right. And kind of filter it.
But exactly. But I think most of the time you want this 2 gauge. You can almost play the Ultra for the cost of exceeding.
Right.
And you want your gauge to crit. So
Okay. And so how often am I playing like these ultras also seem like just good solid shapes without legendary taunt. It's not a situation where I'm necessarily like I need to play legendary taunt into this.
yes, these are good shapes. This one's probably a little overpriced. This one is very fairly priced, competitively priced even.
Right.
But they both have a lot of robbery potential because they both say 7 power.
Right,
and with
sure.
your ability, that's 8 power.
Yeah.
So
an assault that beats focus is maybe not
yep.
worth 3 gauge, but
Focus
it's definitely
and
worth
cross.
some gauge. Yeah, yeah. That's true.
Yep. So yes, this one is of these two. I'm going to be playing this one from hand a lot more often because you're at range 3. I just want to throw 7 damage and advantage at you.
Right.
But when I play this one from hand, it's going to be game winning. Like, this is a range dodge, and Exceed is a game built around trading. Like, a really good strike for you is you play Focus into their grasp. They didn't get to move you. They deal 1 damage, you deal 4.
Right.
So you dealt 3 damage.
Your delta or your sort of the return on investment of you winning that strike is 3.
Yeah.
Right. And this
3
is
and stopping them from doing what they wanted to do by moving you.
And this is 7.
And stopping them from doing whatever they wanted to do. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's a lot. Okay.
So this boost, since we kind of talked about the shapes of the attack, this boost is interesting. I don't value it super highly because my perspective is I'll do this, I'll spend resources, like I spent the Ultra, which I like. I put a card on hand top of my deck, and if I don't skip my draw step, that does nothing unless I'm exceeded, because I'll just draw it again.
Right.
So I've spent 2 cards from hand, and now maybe that's really scary. Maybe my opponent says, okay, I cannot strike into Dan right now. They can just move. They can boost. And
right. There's a lot of actions. There's a lot of actions you could take other than striking.
Yeah.
And then you'll draw.
And when it's my turn, it is like Swift. I can use it as Swift. I can boost +1 power, +1 speed on any card I want.
Right. Okay, that's a good point.
For the cost of 2 cards and giving them and it goes away if I don't immediately use it. I have to use it now.
Right. And it's on a very playable Ultra too.
Yep.
So that makes it difficult as well. And but this kind of speaks to a Dan thing that I have not looked over the rest of this kit. I'm sure you'll get to it. But Dan's ability to stack the deck on his wild swings in some way so that it isn't actually as random as it seems to be is I assume going to be kind of a recurring theme.
It is, yes. Okay. It's a little bit of a mixed theme because some of the ways to do it are quite strong and others of the ways to do it are like this. I don't personally value them almost at all.
Okay.
But it's there.
Okay. Good to know.
And then this boost, I think there are some funny things you can do with this boost. I'll talk about one of them when we get to a boost later in the kit. But the main thing I do with this boost is I have an empty hand, I draw this card, and I don't want to immediately play it. Okay, maybe I'll want to play what I have next.
Right. Okay. So this is just like your it's a very conditional +4 power, and you're trying to play it in a way that doesn't like disrupt its condition. Is that like you're trying
Yes.
not to like disturb the balance of this card when you play it?
Yes. If you boost this and you have more than one card in hand after drawing, it tells your opponent, okay, Dan is about to do something silly, don't let him do that.
Okay.
If you have exactly one card in hand, if they strike into you, for all they know, that card in your hand is the right one, and they're still taking a risk.
Right.
But if you have more than one, they can just strike into you, and the boost does nothing in the intervening time.
Okay, got it.
So, also, again, this attack I value very highly. This attack says range 1 to 4 on it. Range 1 is almost a lie. There are cases with your ability that you wild swings at range 1 and the opponent was like, well, it's range 1, I'll play focus. And
I'll play focus.
You just
sure.
instantly win. But most of the time, this is a range 2 card.
Yeah.
Range 3 and 4 as well, but those are more call-outy because dive and assault are really constant threats at those ranges. At range 2, in the normals, people like to play cross, people like to play spike, and this beats both of them.
Yep, definitely. It's also, in having run, for viewers at home, run approximately 4 of these lessons so far, and having not investigated every kit in the game, it's not super common in my experience for a ranged dodge to also hit at the range that it's dodging. This is, situations like, I don't know, Zangief's Green Hand, Banishing Flat, where you're dodging something where the attack doesn't hit, and that's your benefit for having played it. This does both at the same time for many of the ranges it's talking about, for 2, 3, and 4 at least.
Yep.
Okay.
And yeah, that's why it's a free gauge ultra, because you have to pay that much if you want to get that effect.
Gotcha. Okay. So and when you say competitively priced, that's kind of what you're talking about is being able to say, hey, take 7. Also, you don't hit me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And in addition to the normals, I don't know if I should pull out the cards. I'll just keep it a little generic. There are a lot of strong specials at range 2 that also lose to this card.
Sure. Axe Kick.
Yep. Or Axe Kick actually doesn't, because Axe Kick closes.
Oh, it closes. It closes, of course. Sure.
Yeah, that's actually a really good segue. This is another important thing about this card is this card tends to be a lot more matchup dependent than these other 2 cards. It's always good to have Super Assault. It's always good to have like Taunt. This card, there will be some characters that just look at this card and say, okay, I guess I have to play Assault at range 2 or this card wins. And there are other characters that are like, I'm Vega. I just close 4 with every attack in my kit. I will always beat this card.
Right. I don't actually care about it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So, but yeah, there's like kick shapes are really common and really strong special. This beats kick shapes.
Right.
Projectiles. It's a little like you don't want to play this at range 5. You can play Banishing Flat for 1 gauge at range 5 or 0 gauge and just take the hit.
Right.
But this will cost you the full 5, full 3.
It's an expensive dodge that had better be a pretty threatening projectile that you're dodging.
Yep.
Okay.
If you're not heading back. If you are heading back, then everything's great.
Sure.
Okay. So let's talk about the actual attacks now, the actual specials, because these are the.
I noticed that starting with the ultras, is that because they are a particularly important part of the kit, or is it just that like ultras just come first and then specials in your mind?
It is absolutely because they're a particularly important part of the kit. Dan, a lot of your power budget is in these ultras.
Okay.
Again, maybe Shisho a little less than the others, but it's also just the most easy to just slam down and play.
Sure. Yeah.
So, okay. Let's talk about Godoken first. Godoken is a pretty bad fireball. It's 1 to 4, 4, 4. It's going to be an important part of your mix-up, but like you could be Ryu or Ken, and you could have a fireball that hits at range 3 to 6 and speed 6 or 6 damage.
Or 6 power,
This
sure.
is yes. This is just this is like the really baseline fire. If you showed me a fireball, I'd expect it to hit like 3 to 4 ranges, deal 4 power, have 4 speed, and then do something else
Right.
most
And
of the time.
this loops, but there are other cards in this in this set, other kits in this set that have a looping fireball that have extra things on top of them.
Yes. So the notable thing about this fireball is it's range 1 to 4. This fireball works in melee. You're going to be wild swinging in melee. This fireball will not let you down the way that those fireballs would.
I see. Okay. So when I'm wild swinging it as Ryu at range 2, and I'm like, all right, I know that I've got Tatsu, I've got Donkey Kick, my grasps are down. It's a Hadoken. That sucks.
Exactly.
This doesn't have that problem.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
And it's going to be part of your turn 1 mix-up. You've got a really good version of the really traditional like move in, don't move in mix-up, and this is the don't move in part. And it's nothing special, but it gets the job done.
Right. Having
it's
it at all means that they can't just guarantee a sweep on turn 1 if I strike.
Yep. And then there's some really interesting decision making at that point about whether you return this card, because this one doesn't go back to your hand. Most of them don't. This one goes on top of your deck. And for Dan, that's fine. It's kind of cool because it means you can crit it immediately.
Right. And you have an above curve 5 damage option.
Yes.
Which is cool.
But they know it's there.
Right.
The shape is nothing that special. Like, if they know it's there, they probably have somebody who at least not lose to it, even if they can't beat it.
Right.
But yeah. So, one last thing about this attack. Oh, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to ask, before we continue on over to the other cards, how often should I be mentally appending on +1 power and +1 speed to these shapes? Like I just mentioned that this could be an above curve 5 damage option at range 4 when you wild swing it. Dan wild swings a lot. Should I like with permanent marker be putting on these cards? This is 5 and 5, or is it like what is the actual percentage of time that I'm going to be getting those stat bonuses?
High, but not 100. I couldn't put a proportion to it.
Okay.
You want to evaluate each individual card in both ways, and different cards you have a different likelihood of playing from hand versus seeing on a crit.
Okay.
This card I'm going to play from hand because it's range 4. I have 2 cards that are specials that hit at range 4. So if I'm at range 4, my wild swing is probably not going to work.
It's not very good, right? But if you happen to be at range 2 and you're wild swinging and you get this card, you're like, well, okay, it hit at least.
Yes, and this card is interesting because it's actually a little better than that. This card, again, does not look very impressive.
Mm-hmm.
But when you crit wild swing this card at range 2 or 3, it actually has a lot of pretty good interactions. Because there are a lot of cards that care about the difference between 4 power and 5 power, like Spike.
Sure.
And there are a lot of cards that care about the difference between 4 speed and 5 speed, like Dive, but also like Kick Shapes.
Right.
Or Tatsu. Tatsu's often care about both of those things.
Sure, yeah. You hit 4 or 5 speed. Donkey Kick is another one. You mentioned Kick Shapes.
Yep. 4 power, 4 speed, 4 guard.
Right.
Either one of those would be enough to lose to this.
Right.
But yeah.
Right.
So,
but having both on a wild swing at range 2 is not nothing. Like you're not allowed to do that much damage at that speed generally.
Yeah. Exactly.
Okay.
It's a nice breakpoint. And then sometimes you get this really funny situation where you're defending with this at like range 3. You crit wild swings at range 3, and you look at your opponent's deck and you say, "Oh, I just get 5 damage for free next turn because it's my turn now."
Right. And
doing this on top of your deck is way more interesting when it's about to be your turn.
And do it again. I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll go back to the boost in 1 minute, but here is the other side of our starting mix-up.
Right.
We have the fastest fast dive. Well, okay. A very fast dive.
A 6 speed range 5 option
Yep.
Yeah, okay. That is a fast dive.
So this is the other reason why this card is good range one, is this is a really dominant fast dive option.
Right.
Other people might have this a very similar mix up to this with the speed 5 dive.
Sure.
Or
Beheaded with dive attack and
yep.
infantry bow, mercenary bow, whatever that's called. You've got the faster fast version.
Yep.
Okay.
So if Beheaded is sitting there with EX dive attack, against a lot of characters, you just mash the EX 5-speed dive or something, and you call. The fact that they have a mix-up doesn't matter because you have the EX that's even faster than the mix-up. This says no. You will always be playing a mix-up.
Right. Right.
And
you have to participate in this mind game whether you have a 5-speed dive or not.
Yes. And then the other weakness of this compared to the 3 to 6 fireballs is this one doesn't beat cross hits on turn 1.
Right.
This does.
This does. Okay.
So there's nothing any character really has safe against the end turn 1.
So this kind of like Tatsus often beat cross, and this is kind of a Tatsu. Like it's got the same what do you call it? The same naming structure as a Tatsu. But it's, or does it? Hang on, maybe I'm reading that.
I don't know, Dan. Yeah, I do not know.
You know what? No, I'm gonna hit the eject button on this comparison before I keep going on. I don't know what I'm talking about. I don't think. But the thing I was going to say is that like many characters have, a fireball will beat cross. So they do have some answer to cross on range on turn 1. Dan has that, but not on his fireball. So like the places that the places that beat the options that your opponent have is kind of in unconventional places.
Exactly. Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
So yeah, I wanted to just bring this in because it's the other half of the mix-up, and that's a pretty important part of this card. But sure. I'll talk about the card itself once I finish up with Gaudikin. Sure. This is a boost.
That makes sense. Okay.
So this boost is another tool to turn on your zero-cost ultras. Is one of the first things I noticed about this.
Right. Definitely.
Nice thing is your zero-cost ultras are pretty telegraphed too. That's the reason why I'm often boosting Haugadoken if I have only it in my hand, is if you, or Dan, you draw a card and you like smile to yourself and set the card as an attack, your opponent looks at these ultras and says, is it one of these?
Right.
And so they know. But if you have Psycho-Vision, you can see their hand and say, okay, you know I'm playing Haugadoken, but you don't have any assaults, you don't have any dives. Right. What are you going to do about it?
You can't actually deal with it. And even if you do have assault or dive,
it's a mix-up. Even then, these ultras also form a really good mix-up.
They form a mix-up, but I think that whenever you're playing ultras in a mix-up, the cost of losing them is very expensive. You might not want these to be a mix-up. You might want them to be 100% guaranteed, and you're saying that's what this gives you.
Exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
And yeah, and also this isn't like empty your hand, look at the opponent's hand. This is look at the opponent's hand, and then think about if you want to empty your hand. You can just say, yeah, no, I'll play a different card.
Right. Okay.
Without the force cost.
Right. But you do have to strike.
You do have to strike. That is set in stone.
Right. You just don't have to discard first. Okay.
So yeah, that's the other reason. So I don't. One of the interesting things about this card is what decision to make on turn 1 when you hit with this. Because on turn 1, you put this on top of your deck. The opponent knows it's there. If they have a fast dive, they might say, "Okay, they don't have Dankyaku. I'm just going to attack," and your wild swings are turned off.
Right.
It's not that likely if you put this on top of your deck, you're going to get to hit with it again. But if you don't put it on top of your deck, your opponent can say, "Okay, well, you gave up half of the mix-up. Now I will just play a slow if you don't play, if you strike into me."
Right, and they're relying on the fact that you don't have the other copy of this card or whatever.
Yeah. Right. So often I'll put it on top of my deck just to maintain the threat. I don't want my opponent to just sit back and say, "Okay, you played your fireball. I'm going to just like prep or boost something, and now you again have to deal with me." But I know you're out of fireballs.
Right. Okay.
So I'll put it on top of my deck, and then that tells the opponent, "Okay, do something," and they will. But then you'll draw it again, and you'll have this boost.
Right.
Which is probably what you use it for later.
Right. Okay. So turn 1, play it as an attack. make them respect it, threaten it. It will inevitably come back to your hand at some point, probably quite soon. Now you have a great boost.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Now let's actually go into the other half of our range one mix-up.
Right.
This is a really fast dive. It's pretty. The reward is interesting to evaluate because it's 3 damage. If it hits a slow, you're kind of sad. But this after effect on Dan specifically,
right,
means your next strike can be like EX sweep, EX core Yukin, or crit sweep, crit core Yukin. Something scary.
Right.
It also gives you both of these. Put cards from your hand out of your hand. So one of the ways you play with your hand size.
Okay, I see. All right. So this is like putting aside the obvious benefits of Dan having a card that he knows about on top of his deck to make his Wild Swing stronger. The card from your hand, it's like a less intense version of this boost that you're getting something out of your hand to manage that stuff. And if you have 2 cards in your hand and this was one of them, or rather 3 cards in your hand, this was one of them, now you have 1 and you're scarier now.
Yep. This is one of the Dan has a lot of like interesting sequencing things where you can look at your hand and you can see your Ultra, you say, I want to hit with this Ultra and I don't want to pay 3 gauge this hand. How do I make that happen?
Right. What is my path to getting 1 card in hand to play this? And this is the I only need to get rid of 1 card. You know, like I'm almost there, but it's like a micro spacing, but for your hand size instead of for your position.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I get you.
Because using boosts, you can't get down to 1 card in your hand. You'll always draw for end of turn for a boost that doesn't make you strike.
Right,
so you need to do
strike. Right, gotcha.
Yeah. So you need to do you need to strike. You need to put cards from your hand top of your deck. You need to do something to get down to 1 card in hand.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. And so this does both though, because it not only does it.
Yes, this is a -2 instead of just a -1 if you strike with it.
It's a -2, and also it's something on top of your deck that you can then threaten with. So this is like it's 3 damage and a fast dive is cool. It's probably going to go off. You're probably going to hit with it. But this after is kind of where the power is.
Yes.
Okay.
The after the speed, the 5 range. There's a lot of things to like about this card.
I should say sorry. To clarify what I meant, the after effect is the damage you're doing, not the the damage is not the damage. It's not the punishment. The after effect is the punishment.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. And the fact that you have such a crazy range and speed on it means that punishment is much more likely to go off.
It also, and looking at the boost as well, Dan is not a character that you can zone too easily. This is range 5, 6 speed. This is move 3, do some nonsense.
Yeah.
This is
reposition as much as you want, basically.
Yep. So that's another cool thing.
Right. Really briefly, just to mention, because we haven't actually talked about it, this card does not work at melee range. You cannot.
Everything you were saying about Ryu Hadouken, where like, oh, I wild swing this and I'm sad. This card is that. This is the card you do not want to see when you wild swing.
This is his projectile, but he's the projectile, basically.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah, pretty much.
Okay, I gotcha. And this is a melee projectile. This does all the weird things that a projectile doesn't do. Okay, I see what you're doing.
That's Dan Hibiki for you.
I get it.
And then one more thing about this boost. If you look at the numbers on this boost, this is not actually more efficient in terms of cards in hand than taking the move action.
Right.
You're spending this boost, 1 force, and putting a card into your gauge. So you could have just walked 3.
Right.
But this is a way to do it while key charging, and that's important because Dan loves gauge.
Right. Okay. And mostly that's for ultras and for the crit. Right.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Those are definitely what I want to spend my gauge on. I will change cards if I have to because you're going down to low hand. You need to be back up at high hand. You can't really just spend 3 turns prepping.
Right.
It's not going to go well for you as Dan.
You have a decent. Well, I was going to say you have a decent number of movement options, but a lot of them are either on a 2 gauge ultra or they're 2 sides of the same card.
Yep.
So how often is Dan taking the move action?
Pretty rarely, luckily, just because the 2 sides of this card are good, and this card is good.
Right.
And also, your range one mix-up kind of sets the tone for the game, too. You throw this out, either you're fireballing them, and if you play the fireball successfully, they're like, okay, I want to get closer to Dan so he doesn't do it again.
Right.
And if you play it unsuccessfully, it's probably because they dove into you.
Right. And okay, and they're not zoning you. Now you don't have to worry about making the move action.
Yeah, and if you played this side of the mix-up, well, you're in.
You're in.
That's guaranteed. You're in.
Sure.
So. And very, very minor consideration, characters with free altars have a little more force to spend, but...
Good point. Okay, I see. Yeah, so this is, each of these is 2 force, so if you have... Well, I mean, putting this into your gauge by hitting with it, that does mean that you have an upside on your economy that most other characters don't have.
Yes, that is yes. Dan is a little, like I was saying, economically, you don't have any like draw a bunch of card boosts, but yeah, if you play an ultra and hit with it and it costs you no gauge, you didn't spend any force. That's cool.
Yeah, and you're now you have 2 force that you could spend just like it was from your hand, but it's not clogging up your hand with and keeping you from playing the other copy of the ultra.
Yep.
Right. Interesting. Okay.
Speaking of no economy boost, let's go on to the next card. This is Dan's economy boost. You want to crit. This attack says until they win a combat, which they might not win a combat for a while, you're getting a gauge every time you wild swing.
Right. Oh, okay. So that didn't even occur to me that we're talking about how Dan loves gauge. When he's striking, it's fairly rare when he's using his ability to go gauge positive. Of course. Okay, this fixes that.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
This boost is really nice. This is your tech bait. It's funny because a lot of other tech bait boosts are like 1 force ultra boost. This is a 0 force special boost that sustains itself.
Right.
But if your opponent can't win a strike, they need to tech this because you're getting so much value out of it over the just crit wild swing, crit wild swing, crit wild swing.
Right. And this actually, I just had a conversation with D about Guile prior to hopping on a call with you to record this Dan guide. If we're talking about shades,
Yep.
This stun counts reactively, correct?
Yes.
If I play sweep, outspeed my opponent and hit. I'm sorry. If I play grasp into my opponent's sweep, outspeed them, they hit me with the grasp with the sweep. I am stunned. I lose this boost.
You do lose this boost.
Yes. Gotcha. Okay.
So, yes, that is the weakness. But this is pretty comparable to Shades. And if you were just talking about Shades, I imagine you were talking about how amazing Shades is. Shades is a great boost.
Yeah, and D mentioned as well that like this is an oddly shaped tech bait in a lot of cases because it is so like it's not a stat boost really. The 2 guard is cool, but it's really the critical, the gauge economy.
Yeah, it's like 2 power a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, that's actually exactly what D said.
This is swift instead of fierce. This is 1 speed and 1 power.
1 speed, 1 power. When you're wild swinging, and you probably are going to be wild swinging a lot. Okay.
Yeah, with this card out in particular, like, go for it. Crit wild swings are amazing. I will sometimes play usually a safe option because I don't trust my wild swing that turn for whatever reason, and I want to sustain this boost and like focus or something. We'll keep this boost live pretty consistently.
Consistently, sure.
But yeah.
Okay, so
this is swift.
There's a possibility that that my opponent, when I'm playing Dan, is going to get a read on my play patterns here because they know that I'm not going to play grasp because it will lose this incredibly useful boost.
Yes, that's true, but you want the effect of this boost as well, right?
Right.
So, are you going to play from your hand at all?
Okay, I see. So
yes.
So if I'm going up against Dan, and Dan has this boost down, and they play from hand, should I be assuming that they're playing a slow guardy attack, or at least that's part of the mix-up, right? That I have to at least consider that.
Possibly, I'd mostly do that on defense because on offense, slow attacks are generally pretty low impact. Just creating a sweep on your own turn into the opponent's sweep doesn't feel very good.
Okay.
But,
okay, I see what you mean.
They're good.
Okay.
There is one thing which is notable, which is Spike. Spike often loses without being stunned.
That's true.
Like if your opponent plays Assault into your Spike or crosses out of your range to your Spike.
Stun doesn't mean lose combat. It means stunned. Okay, that's good. That's good to remember. Okay.
Yep. So, yeah, if the DM plays from hand, there's potentially a couple of reasons. If I have this boost and you want to strike into me, that might be a good time to play us. Like that might be the time where you have the read. I'll probably play a slow, but I might cross out too. So
right. Okay.
It's still a mix up.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this an attack as well? Like you jumped right to the boost. Is that
yes.
because this attack is not really an attack?
It's because the segue felt good for the economy boost. This attack is one of your better attacks, but in an interesting way.
Right.
If you don't crit this attack, it's okay. It's a speed 6 range 2 option. So like there are aggressive cards that have this kind of shape.
Right.
But they give you some kind of upside for that. And this one does have upside. It has sometimes you'll beat a sweep.
7 power, sure.
But it also has a lot of downside. Sometimes you'll have block or leg taunt or the other Koryukin, and you will hit your opponent's cross and then lose to it anyway.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Interesting. So you've caught the cross. You did the thing, but you did 0 damage and you didn't stun them.
So we'll get into this later. That's part of what you're going to be looking for in what you want in your deck. But here's the other thing. If you crit this attack, all that drawback I just said goes away. This is now at least 1 damage and possibly 8 damage.
8, right.
At speed 6. This attack is like mini Shinryuken
that's an
for
ultra.
1 gauge. I mean, you don't know if you're playing it when you play it, but it's there in your deck waiting for you.
So in terms of how this card actually works, if I wild swing and crit this card, I have a DP shape, a 1 damage DP shape, that I then discard the top card of my deck after that, and it gets the bonus on top of that one.
Yes, on top of the 1.
Okay,
so possibly 8. This is
right. So
it's a DP shape that beats focus.
Right. So I can't fix that with where is it? Lucky.
Oh,
for
Denkiyaku.
Yeah, I can't. I could put this on top of my deck, but that means that I'm not putting this on top of my deck to hit with this.
Yeah, you have to make that decision.
Okay, so it can either be a consistent 7 damage or a sometimes 8 damage.
Yep.
I can't do both.
Probably not.
Okay.
The one thing, there's another thing you can do, which is like critting. Dan's crit is very similar to EX for his attack shapes. Your armor and guard don't matter on any of your attacks in your deck. You either have enough on leg taunt or have none on everything else.
Right.
So you can just EX this from hand, and that's like critting it.
And that is another DP shape that beats focus. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
assuming I have how. Assuming I have how on
assuming
top of
you have how.
But I could have fixed that. I could have hit with Dankyu.
Yes.
Gotten how, and then done the guarantee 7 speed above curve option that beats focus. Okay.
The one reason you might not want to EX this is this boost is really good.
That's a really good boost, right? So that's the opportunity cost there.
That's how this attack is. This attack is a crit. This attack is an EX. This attack is a boost. I personally don't like playing this as a raw attack very often because the lose condition is way worse than it normally is.
Right.
And the win condition, you can still beat sweep, but you need specifically one of these cards to beat sweep. So, yeah.
Right. And, so it's turn 1, you played Dankyu, you're now at range 1, this is now below curve. So you even then, even if you then put How on top of your deck,
you're still taking a risk. I would put the Koryukin on top of my deck in that case and just go for that, probably.
Okay. All right. And then you just see what is below it. You're taking a different kind of risk, but you're pretty guaranteed.
Yeah. You might just do 1 damage. You'll be sad if you do, but you'll at least do 1 damage. You're not going to lose to the cross. You're not going to lose to the grasp.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then your final card. This is a pretty bad grasp-like. Sometimes it wins the game for you because it is a grasp-like that can do 5 damage.
Sure.
It's a grasp-like that can do 6 damage with your crit. But the fact that it says at random is really sad. If I'm discarding cards from my hand, I really want to control which cards I'm discarding from my hand so I
Oh,
can play the
right.
good ones afterwards.
I was about to talk all about how, oh, I see. This is the if this is micro spacing for your hand size, this is macro spacing, but not
Yep.
if it's random because I'm potentially losing the payout of having a low hand size in the first place.
Yep. There is
Gotcha.
something like if you're at range 1 and you can go down to 0 cards in hand, you might go for it. You might just say, okay, now I'm going to start crit wild swing and my alters are going to be 3.
Right.
But I like to play a little more measured than that most of the time. But this card has a nice constellation price. It does speed 7. It's nice for your crits that you have very good fast options, or very fast options. You have this on curve, and you have a gap at range 3, which is going to matter a lot. But then you have this above curve.
Way above curve, right.
So at range 1, your opponent can't just play grasp and say, I'm safe.
Right.
This is a threat. Even if the attack is not great, it's there.
And this is kind of it's not quite, I mean, it's like a scuffed Rekka effect, right? It's sort of if I initiate this into my opponent's grasp and win combat with that, maybe I'm not discarding anything.
Yep.
And I'm just doing 2 damage.
But if you hit their Ryutatsu with 4 guard, exactly.
I can spend up to the breakpoint and a little past the breakpoint to beat it.
Yep. Notably, this card has kind of weird wording. I don't know if this has come up in the past for stuff you've seen. This pull 1, these are each separate. So you pull the opponent to range 1, to range 1, to range 1.
Oh, okay. So it maintains at range 1, but it might be able to, like, I might be able to uncorner myself with it or something. But I can't set a new range using this card.
Which is mostly good for you because range 1 and range 2 is where you're going to want to be.
Right, okay.
And then this boost is really good. So it has a lot of use cases. This is one of the things I like about Dan is you have cards that have pretty flexible things going on with them. You have like this Psycho Vision, you have this Leg Taunt, you have How. This card could just be a key charge.
Right.
Like, look at the top of your deck, add it to your gauge. This card can be, oh, I see what my next crit wild swing is. I like it, I'm going to go for it.
Right.
You can also do stuff like, oh, I see my next... I'm at range 3, I see Sweep on top of my deck. I don't necessarily want to initiate with Sweep at range 3, but I can just play the Assault in my hand and then initiate with Sweep at range 3 on the next turn.
Right.
Lots of flexibility. And
so I can't... Because I'm playing Peak, I'm not striking when I play Peak. I've added a card to my gauge. I have a new top card of my deck that is now going to my hand. So I'm going like
you have to. Oh
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think I get where you're going with this, which is if you want to take advantage of the card on top of your deck, the knowledge, you have to commit to a strike.
Yes.
You can't, but you don't have to commit with the strike with the card on top of your deck. You could strike from hand and then keep the information for later.
I see. Okay, and then I have it for next turn. I know what the card is, and I'll be able to. I have many. I could play this right now. I know exactly what whether Haugadoken's on top of my deck or not, and I can win with that.
Yep. Oh yeah, and there you go. That's a way to. Yeah. Well, I guess again the same thing you were saying. You played the Koryukin from hand, but yeah.
Right.
There's lots of flexibility to this one. I think striking with a card that's not the card you looked at is probably the rarest case, just because situation might change. You might end up drawing it. You get a gauge, but you could have just got a gauge.
Right.
But it's right sometimes.
Okay, that makes sense.
And this card, this Peak, it's a key charge. You really like your first point of gauge because it turns your defense on. Mm-hmm. It turns your crit wild swings on. I think it's a really hard decision. If I have 0 gauge and I'm at range, a range that I don't expect the wild swing to be good. Like if I'm at range 4, I didn't draw my opening mix-up. I have Peak in my hand. Should I use it? I want the key charge, but I want to get a guaranteed crit wild swing as well.
Right. And if you're at range 4 and you happen to draw this, you play it. You probably got gauge anyway.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, this one will get you gauge for sure. This one might get you gauge.
Right.
Hopefully it will. This one, so this card really, really shines when you're at a range you want to be at and you already have gauge, because now you can say, okay, I see a really good card, I'm going to crit strike with it.
Right.
And if you don't see a good card, okay, it's key charge. That's a pretty good fail case.
Yeah, definitely.
So this is a very strong boost. It's okay that this attack is kind of bad because this attack is a threatening wild swing. Your opponent has to respect it. And if you ever have this card in your hand, you're going to boost it.
Right. Okay. So that kind of means, looking at the kit broadly, like attack, usually an attack, has a lot of utility as an attack, but is also a great boost. Same, but mostly an attack.
Yep.
Mostly a boost, but has some utility as an attack. Always a boost.
Once you draw it, mostly a boost has some utility as an attack.
Fair point. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, and this is like you said, it's a boost.
It's probably a boost. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
So here's the thing. You already kind of cottoned onto this, but here's the strongest parts of the kit.
Yes.
And And when you crit this is the strongest part of the kit too. So all the strongest things in your kit cost gauge. You love gauges, Dan. Your cards give you gauge. This is important. So a lot of the strategy of Dan is, how do I preserve my gauge to get the value out of it when I need to?
Okay.
I want to crit Wild Swing and win strike with it. I want to play these Ultras and win strikes with them. I do not want to waste that crit. Is a particularly important one.
So if you miss with Dan when you're wild swinging, you're out more than the strike, right? You're out.
So you're down a gauge as well.
Yeah, and that's maybe even more important.
Yep.
Okay.
So you have these boosts. This boost is a little funky because it's rare you're going to want to retreat 3, and if you want to close 3 and add a card to your gauge, well, you have something for it. Oh wait, it's the attack on this boost.
Right, yeah, I might as well just do that.
So this boost is a little situational, but like, this card is giving you a gauge. This card is giving you a gauge.
Right. It's depending on what side of it you're playing it. And also, like, this isn't move up to 3. You're rocketing through the air. You're getting to exactly range 4 from range 1 or whatever.
Yep.
Okay.
Which is good because, again, economically, this boost is not more efficient except for the key charge and just walking there. Except for like crossing over someone, which is probably when I would boost this. Is you're at close range, you're in the corner. This attack isn't doing anything for you. You might as well get out of the corner. Might as well get some gauge.
And you really don't want to, like, this would be a great out of the corner option, except you don't hit. And you really, really want to hit with this because its after is crazy. Well,
the after happens even if you miss. That's actually funny. This is a double whammy when you wild swing this and you don't want to. You might not want this after at the moment you wild swing it, and you just like, okay, I miss, I spent the gauge, and I have to put a card on top of my deck that I don't necessarily want there.
Oh, interesting. But also, I mean, so if they, if this is the fastest fast dive, we're talking about the use cases of it at range. If I'm close up and I whiff with this card, from the wild swing, putting something from my hand on top of my deck could also be a pretty big benefit, and I'm getting most of that benefit even if I did whiff. I'm just not getting gauge from it from the hit. Yeah, it's a
double-edged sword for sure.
Okay.
There's upside and downside.
Gotcha. Okay.
So how do we preserve gauge? We're playing these Ultras. We're critting whenever we can. So we need to figure out whenever we can is, because we want to do this crit as much as we can, as long as we're getting value out of it.
Right.
And I mentioned it earlier, that's going to be range 2, range 1. It will sometimes be range 3, but that's way riskier because this attack doesn't hit at range 3, this attack doesn't hit at range 3, this attack doesn't hit at range 3.
Right.
And normals. I think the most normals hit at range 2, everything but grasp and block.
Right. Which gets you gauge
Oh,
anyway.
and dive, I guess. Dive as well, but at least if you miss with a crit range 2 dive, you're probably not getting hit either, at least.
Right. Right. Unless they specifically play cross.
Yep. So range 2 is our most consistent range by a lot. These are attacks that we miss Dankyu, we miss Psycho. We're always going to miss Dankyu. Let's just put this to the side.
Right.
You're never going to hit this card with a crit Wild Swing.
Right. Because you're not going to be wild swinging at the range that one hits.
Yep. There are some little edge cases like, oh, they played Spike and you dodged it. You're at range 1, they played Focus and you dodged it. But that's the best you're going to get.
Right.
So, and we'll put this is another really bad Wild Swing. These are your 2 worst Wild Swings because you just don't, you invested a gauge into the strike.
You don't get any benefit out of it.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, the block at least probably gets you gauge back, but you would rather be getting
that's the
value out of
consolation
that.
prize.
Yeah. You'd rather be getting value out of that by actually blocking something with it.
Exactly. Especially, like, as Dan, you are initiating Wild Swings some of the time. And taking your turn to strike and go engage neutral and possibly spending a bunch of force because they swept you on defense feels really bad.
Yeah, that sucks.
So these are your worst Wild Swings. You don't want these. Let's talk about your great Wild Swings. These are great. Obviously.
Yep.
And then this one's great. We talked about this one being great. And then I would probably say of the normals, this one, because at range 1, now your sweep beats sweep.
Sweep, sure.
And
at range 2, the other range that you're doing this, it also beats Spike.
Yes. Yeah. Though people defending with Spike is pretty rare, but
sure.
It'll happen sometimes.
Yeah.
Cross. It has all the same interactions as Koryukin. It's a DP that beats Focus. It's just not as exciting.
Right.
So you'd rather hit for 8, but you'll take not getting hit.
Yep.
And then personally, I like Assault a fair bit because range 2 is a good Wild Swing range for you, and a speed 6 Assault is gaining you advantage. You're going to range 1, which is another good range for you.
Yep.
It just keeps the combo going.
Just do it again, sure.
Okay, so these are our great Wild Swings, which leaves the remaining in our pool of, like, okay to bad Wild Swings. Here are our range 1 only options. At range 1, they're an important part of your mix-up. Your opponent can't ever play a speed 7 and 2 safely at range 1 because you might just defensively Wild Swing them.
Right.
But they miss too often to be excited about having them in your deck. Misses too often, again.
Yep.
It's a little nicer because when it misses, a lot of time you don't get hit. That's nice, but it might throw you from range 1 to range 3, which you don't want.
Sure.
Quite good. Speed 4 Spike is a strong card, but it misses at range 1, and range 1 is your second favorite place to Wild Swing behind range 2.
Right.
So this is like a step above. This is range 1, range 2. It's a good place to Wild Swing. This is Focus. Focus is a good card. It doesn't get anything from the Wild Swing. It's just Focus.
I'm so happy that my Focus outsped my opponent's sweep.
I traded up a little bit about it.
Up 1, yeah, that's cool.
But that's it. That's all you got.
For a gauge, you do want more than that. That makes sense.
So, again, it's like the opposite as Spike. It doesn't get anything from being Wild Swing, but it's a pretty good card to just happen to play.
Right.
And this card is surprisingly good as a Wild Swing, because, as we were talking about earlier, 5 power, 5 speed.
Yeah, that interaction is impressive for how sort of that card doesn't really seem that incredible on the face of it.
Yep. So I don't know. I'm putting this like vertical order is probably like not. I don't think this card's like better than Spike, but
right.
Yeah.
But it's something
better than it looks. It gets a lot out of being crit Wild Swinged.
Okay. Now, does that mean that I should be trying to like stretch my brain to include the possibility of being really happy that these cards are in my hand because they're not in my deck?
Yes, absolutely. So how do we control our Wild Swing odds? We have 2 ways.
Have them in my hand instead.
Yes, and we don't have the most control over that because Exceed is a game of 30-card decks, and you just draw your deck in order. You don't have a boost unless you put cards back in your deck except on top.
Right.
You have your mulligan, and you have your reshuffle.
Right.
During your mulligan, keep these cards. This is part of your range for mix-up. You want it anyway.
You want it anyway, but keep any blocks you've got.
Maybe this card's... yeah. Keep these cards. These cards, throw them all back. None of them are good on your turn 1 anyway. Well, you might want to run in, but like you have better things to do.
You have better ways to run in than that, sure.
So throw these all back.
Okay.
So these are the cards you're going to have in your hand on range 1 in your dream world.
Right.
And notably, it's your range 1 mix-up.
That's going to take me a little while to
it's backwards, right?
Yeah, that's very strange.
These are your good cards, so get rid of them.
So get rid of them as quickly as you can, right? That's wild. It's wild swing.
Thank you for that one.
There's a reason that I'm doing video guides and not stand-up comedy, Rose. That was the best I've got. So that is a incredibly strange concept, but it is fitting into Dan's sort of overall play style. I guess like one question that I have is like we've gone through the kit, we've gone through sort of his wild swingy play patterns, we've gone through his range. Would you characterize him as being kind of a rushdown character, a defensive set play character? Like, is there an archetype for him, or is he just kind of a weirdo?
He is absolutely a weirdo, but he's also a pretty aggressive character.
Okay.
Let me undo this mess I made by mixing together all my normals and specials. I probably don't need the normals anymore, but I'll keep them orderly just in case I do.
Sure.
Here are your specials, and here are your ultras again. And look at these boosts. Which of them say stats on them?
Yeah, not a single one.
Yeah, this one sort of says stats when you draw it in the perfect hand for it.
Right.
This one says stats, but they're stats that you could have gotten some other way. They're just saving you money on the stats.
Right.
And this one, again, it says choosing what to put the stats on, but it doesn't actually give you more stats.
Right.
You just don't have the kit to be a set play character.
Right.
You have the season 1 through 5 boost, so like you have options, but anyone who's dedicated to it will do it better than you.
Right. So I should be, as Dan in general, I should be, if I'm being an aggressive kind of rush downy type character, am I CCing aggressively for... Wait, but that I'm wild swinging. Hold on. I was about to ask, am I CCing aggressively for the options I need? But that would lose me the options I need where I need them. How am I?
Yes.
How am I controlling my deck shape then?
You mulligan, and when you spend gauge, obviously this one doesn't always matter because some games don't even go to reshuffle. When you spend gauge, same rule. You spend your better wild swings first, you spend your worst wild swings later.
Okay, so put those back in so that when they get reshuffled, there's a higher chance that they're in the deck.
And other than that, you're not. You're at the mercy of the deck.
Okay.
It's Dan.
Okay.
But luckily, your kit is designed in such a way. Did I talk about why you like range 1 and range 2, really? Or just that you do? Other
than the fact that many of your things hit there, you didn't. I don't think you mentioned specifically why range 1 is perfect for Dan.
Yeah. So let's start with range 2 because it's your favorite range. Range 2. Everything that's going to hit. Sorry, Danky. Sorry, Psycho.
Right.
Psycho isn't unfair. Psycho hits sometimes. Everything that's most of your kit is great at range 2. This is the optimal range for this, which is, if you crit it, probably your best special. This is the optimal range for this. This is a completely acceptable range for like taunt. It's not range free on defense, which is where it loses to dive.
Right.
And on offense, well, crit, this is an incredible range for Shisho. Uncrit, it's okay. So if you're crit wild swinging and you see any of these cards, you are thrilled. If you see this card, you're happy. You see this card, you're happy. There's just a lot of things that are good, and the things that are good win crushingly.
Right.
This can break focus. This crit can break focus. This would breaks focus. It doesn't matter, but it does.
Right. It keeps them from drawing a card. That's what it gets out of breaking focus.
Oh yeah, true.
Value.
So that's range 2. At range 2, you can just, depending on how aggro you're feeling, back to the you can. There's a spectrum of very silly Dan, very not silly Dan. if you're on the more very silly side, which again could be right because you can look at your deck, you can't control your deck, but you can observe your deck. You can say, "Oh wow, my deck's amazing." Yeah, just crit Wild Swing on offense at range 2. It'll work,
Right.
probably.
It'll probably work, right? And
If it doesn't, it'll be funny.
That's right. That's true. That like there is kind of every card in his kit has like cleanup. Something weird might happen as a part of the stat line, as a part of the effect line. Like it'll just happen weird, and people will laugh about it, and that's an okay loss condition for you.
Yep. Also, what was I? Yeah. And then when you win by more than most people do ever. Just
Right.
like 8 damage. That
No one's ever supposed to get that much out of one win and exceed. You're supposed to trade.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that's range 2. That's your best range. Range 1 is similar. The things you lose at range 1 is you lose the mid speed option. You are more vulnerable to grasp because like this now loses to grasp. This is much worse of a Wild Swing, which is sad because when you see this as a Wild Swing and it's great, you are very happy.
Right.
But it's okay. It's not a bad range to be. The nice thing about range 1 in particular is the range 1 meta is like you play slows or you play grasp.
Pretty much, yeah.
Or okay, you cross out sometimes. That's the triangle.
That's like
cross.
the range 1 mid speed is cross.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
And as Dan, no part of that triangle is safe for the opponent, and you're not investing very much to make it really scary to them. If you're playing against Dan and you're sitting at range 1, you're like, what do I strike with? And you don't have boosts out, the answer is, okay, I mean, this is a pretty good range 1 card, but what if Dan just crit Wild Swings and beats it?
Right.
What if Dan just crit Wild Swings and beats this? Or this?
Which he can definitely just do.
So range 1 is... It's a good aggressive range for you. It's not as good as range 2, but it's not bad. It's a good defensive range for you. Your opponent doesn't have stuff that they're comfortable throwing out into you, probably.
Okay.
And you can get some incremental value. You can prepare. You can boost peak. You can say, oh, there's my range 1 crit sweep. Sure, I'll take that. If not, I'll just get some gauge.
I'll get some gauge for free, right.
So that's why we like range 1 and range 2. And then range 3 is interesting. Range 3, because normals have a really good mix-up at range 3.
Right.
We don't dislike range 3 on our own turn. This is also, range 3.
That's
on our own turn, this is good at range 3. But on defense, this is where the lack of on-curve options in our kit comes in. On defense at range 3, we are also just playing with normals.
Right.
Our crits are not reliable enough that we really want to do them. This is why you'll sometimes crit at range 3, because if you don't, you just have nothing particularly good at range 3, and at least there's a chance you'll get like a crit assault or a crit Shisho.
Or yeah, you're hoping for something. Like Godokin works there too, but most
it's
of
not,
their stuff is not
perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we're at range 3, we probably want to like get to range 1 if we can. Get to range 2 by move actioning. Do something.
Okay. So
and then
is Dan like you mentioned at one point that like you do just kind of have to trust your deck and go with it and play your deck as you get it. Like, is Dan particularly susceptible to getting screwed by deck order? It seems like he would be, but you are a competitive tournament player. I don't think that you would play a character that can just be so unlucky that you lose and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
How are you getting out of
that? So that goes back to the if I lose, it'll be funny. If I win, it'll be funny. You can lose sometimes with your deck order. If you're individual Wild Swing, you might get something terrible, but you can make it up really well because another Wild Swing might be better than you're normally allowed to get in a strike.
And that is something that I keep forgetting. That I'm evaluating this whole conversation on a strike by strike basis. How many times do you actually have to win with Dan on Wild Swings with these cards in your deck to be pretty brutally ahead? Yeah, it's not much.
So the reward is there. If
Right.
everything in your deck is in the wrong order, that can happen. Your Wild Swings will be miserable that game, but this ability also says your opponent knows your Wild Swings have +1 power, +1 speed. It's scary to strike into Dan.
True.
And you can just play like, okay, I'm going to hit you with Gadok in turn 1. Okay, put it on top of my deck. Maybe your opponent does something wrong and you get to hit them again. You can play the normal game okay. You can put cards on top of your deck as well with Denkyu. You can only Wild Swing if you see a good Wild Swing with Peak.
Yep.
I think you are somewhat susceptible to just like having bad Wild Swings all game, but not actually that much more than a normal character, because a lot of your Wild Swings are just good as well.
Right. So I'm going to lose a strike here and there to deck order, but like this isn't a I'm trusting my fate.
Yeah,
to
this
the
is
heart of
not
the
a character
cards.
you're going to win a perfect with. This is a character that you might just like beat someone up despite being down 10 health with, though.
Right. But and that said, like this isn't the perception of Dan is that you just get lucky and win, or you get, and that's kind of like that fits into the fantasy of the character that he's kind of a goofball. But this is like you're mathing this out, right? This is a probability thing, and the numbers are
Yes,
much
that's really important, is paying
Yeah.
attention to what's left in your deck.
Yeah,
People say like range 2, like Imogen, range 2 Wild Swinger. And that's true. Dan, range 2 Wild Swinger. That's true. But what if I've used up both my spikes and I know my grasps and Psychos are in my deck? Maybe I'll move to range 1.
range 1, sure.
Yeah. So you gotta play to your outs. Don't throw away Gauge on your crit Wild Swing at range 3, because it is more likely just going to be throwing away Gauge than at range 1 or 2.
Right, and even
Except maybe I need it. Maybe I'm behind and I need something to turn the game around.
Yeah, and an uncommon number of your range 1 options are down because you played them as boosts or something. Because if you won out with all of these combats, the game is probably getting close to over. You're probably not just down to these options, but you're boosted too many of these. You've got a lot of range 3 options left. It's time to start Wild Swinging at range 3.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And then also, these are really messed up cards. It bears repeating.
Yeah,
this one particularly. But if you play a pretty safe game, you get your Gauge, you can just win combat with this for 5 damage with Spike, with this for 7 damage.
Right. Just
so that's your consistent plan.
Okay. And there's nothing about Dan's Wild Swinging plan that is necessarily turning off these cards as options, except maybe the fact that
just the Gauge cost, just the economy.
Yeah, and when I'm Wild Swinging, I'm not reducing my hand size so that I can play these freely. So, but like when you said that this was a competitively priced Ultra, you weren't talking about it when it was 0 Gauge. You were talking about it when it was 3 Gauge. It's still good.
Yes.
Yeah, it's still
really good.
It's a really, really powerful Ultra, even when it's not free.
Yep.
Okay, that's good to remember. That I don't need to have 0 cards in hand for this to be a really dangerous option. That's just a bonus.
Yes, this is your, if it wins the strike, you are really ahead option.
Right.
But you might lose the strike, so it is scary. This is your, it's going to win the strike option. So how do I do the other like 20 damage?
Right. Right. Okay. So that's actually that's a really interesting way to think about it. All right. So my opponent has 20 life because I have this card. I have 2 copies of this card. If I have Gauge, I'm going to hit them for at least 5 damage twice. Their maximum life total is 20, and I actually just have -4 Gauge and no copies of this card or something. Like this is a tax on their life that they have to take this damage.
Yep.
And everything else is basically just like, well, I could probably make up 20 damage with the help of some consistent options and the help of some statistically very likely options.
Yes, pretty much. And then your individual cards are not bad. This one is a little... Every card in your deck has a good use. There are some characters that you look at some cards, you're like, this card's force.
Yeah. What is this even for?
This card is, again, amazingly good, actually, shockingly. It doesn't look... The difference between 6 and 5 just matters a lot.
Yeah.
This card, like we said, really, really, really good card.
Yeah.
And that's why I like to only. That's why I don't play it from hand. Is playing it from hand leaves you more open to the deck order not being in your favor. If you crit or EX this, it's always doing something. The question is just how much.
Right. Okay. Yeah. No. I feel like an odd amount of this lesson has had to be devoted to like understanding the Dan mindset, because when I came into this, I was like, Dan is like the perception of the character is that he's lucky, and this is about like no, like you don't actually need to get uncommonly lucky to win with Dan. I need to stop thinking about it that way. You have really strong options and you can just play them.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, that is I think really important to remember that like yeah, he's a goofball. He'll kill you. Like you
Yes,
like
he's not a joke character. He's a lethal joke character.
yeah, you'll win with these cards. I need to sort of dispel some of that like that preconception in my mind that he only just kind of wins through luck. And I mean that speaks to sort of the beginner mindset about wild swinging in general. I think that you as an experienced player probably think that wild swinging is much better than a lot of newer players would.
Yep.
Even when you're not playing as Dan. I think that that's something that I should remember as well, that wild swinging is a great option when I'm not Dan often.
Yes.
So yeah, I've got to keep that in mind too.
And then since we are talking about like how do I actually win as Dan, I don't know. I have 2 points. I don't know which of them you think is more directly applicable because I want to talk about both of them, but I don't know which one I should start with to segue from that.
Sure.
It's like, what is your general game plan, and what are the things that I do that are really strong?
Yeah, let's like I feel like we've gone specific to general. Let's go combos and then let's go game plan.
Okay. So, here are combos. This card itself is a combo.
With anything.
Specifically, these two are the best ones because you can make them hit, and then you don't get hit back.
Right. Yep.
So,
it's just free 2 gauge for 5 damage and positioning, and you drew a card and lots of other great stuff. And you have 2 force engage. Why not? Wait, hold on. Sorry. Do you have 3 force engage?
No, this card does not actually go to your gauge. It's a little more expensive than it looks because it doesn't hit.
Oh, this always gets discarded.
But the thing you played goes 2 gauge. This is like a 2 gauge and 1 force ultra, I guess.
Interesting. Okay, I get you.
And then this is sometimes an option. It's not as like these ones are you want one of these in hand so that when your opponent plays your sweep, plays their focus, you have a punish.
Right.
But if they don't, if they play something faster, if they play something that you don't need those to punish, this is more damage. This is a discard, so it's not bad either.
Right.
So those are your punish options, and then like you could do funny stuff. You can play these hopefully for free, but maybe you just have 5 gauge. You never know.
Right.
So that's a That's again like silly. Here is this boost. Look at your opponent's hand, discard a number of cards from your hand, then strike. You are a season 1 through 5 character, which means you have reading, and you have advantage, and you have advantage. So look at their hand, play one of these 2 cards, hit them, and then read something that you can beat.
Yep.
Yeah, that there's like a little bit of risk that maybe they have only 1 normal in their hand, they know you're going for it, they play that normal. Maybe they have sweep and they sweep the reading out of your hand. But this is a lot of 3 damage if it works. Like it's guaranteed reading. People love guaranteed readings.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean at the very least, like it's part of the mix up. If you're incentivizing them to play the 1 normal they have in your hand because they know you're going to play Assault or Shiso, just don't play those cards. Right? Just play something that beats the 1 normal they have as a mix up or something. You can at least play around that.
Yep.
Okay.
So, and yeah, and it's easier to do this when they have a lot of cards in hand. That increases the risk they have an EX that stops you from doing it, but the trade-off is probably worth it. Like, all right, I don't want to categorically say that. It's not that common for someone to only have 1 normal in hand.
Yeah.
So, more often than not, this will work
Right.
if you can hit.
But also, like, I mean, if like the downside of playing Peak and you see that they have one normal in hand, you can opt out of this combo and just do something else. Like that's not to say that like if you see the opportunity to do it, go for it. But just
Yep.
playing Peak, getting that information, being able to stack your deck and all the other things that Peak lets you do without reading is still super valuable.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just that if it's there, I mean, I will want to do this combo when I have the opportunity to do a reading. But yeah, if I miss, it's not like I tried to go for a reading and I missed and I lost the strike. It's just that I don't get to go for the reading.
Right, and now you got to focus in your hand still from.
Yep.
Yeah, you've got other options. Okay.
This boost again, it's key charge in the worst case.
Yes.
Key charge is usually on like Donkey Kick, Axe Kick. Key charge is a really good boost. They put it on cards you don't want to spend key charge.
Right. Yeah.
This is a card you do want to spend key charge.
This is a super playable copy of key charge.
And it's better than key charge because it's also Swift Now Strike.
Right.
Swift Now Strike is a one force ultra boost on Bang's Ultra. This is a 0-4 special boost.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So that's another really powerful thing. This, Psychic Glory, this is Swift that sustains itself for 3. There's a boost in Season 7, which is Swift, that sustains itself for 2 gauge.
Yeah.
This card is a really good call out. It's, again, you're never not taking a risk. That is the downside of this type of shape, is you never are not taking a risk when you play it. But you can stack the odds on that risk. Your opponent does not want to play Assault into Dan at range 2, because range 2 is the range where you crit and win strikes, and Assault is really bad into your average crit.
Right.
So
and
they'll probably play like,
and you're talking specifically about playing this on defense into their attack, right?
Yeah, from here. That's yes.
Right. So they're unlikely to play Assault at range 2 anyway because it's under curve. When you have crits online, that curve becomes a lot steeper. So
yeah, it's a 2 points under curve now.
Right.
So it's really scary.
Yeah, you can probably make it happen to get how to hit.
I like playing this card on defense more. There's no reason you can't play it on offense, though. It's perfectly fine on offense as well.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah. You're not desperately trying to win any speed ties with 1 speed.
Yep.
Right.
So that's another really strong option. And then lastly, this one's more of like this is a randomness, but weighted randomness. You have Wild Swings. Most characters have Wild Swings. Wild Swings are not as bad as people think, but yes, just Wild Swing without a plan will not win you strikes. You have a thing you can do to improve your Wild Swings. This does a lot.
Yeah.
But every character has a thing they can do to improve their Wild Swings, and that's have Altars online. You can do both at the same time.
Right.
So that is the real sweet spot for you as Dan. You have 4 gauge, you're at range 1 or 2. Now everything is amazingly threatening. There's no safe strike for your opponent to make. You can crit Wild Swing. You might just beat their focus. You might just beat anything.
Right.
Etc.
So and just for this is not actually what you're talking about, but for clarification, can you choose to invalidate an Ultra if you have gauge for it when you Wild Swing?
Yes, you can. That's important.
Yeah, not in the use case that you're describing. You're not probably looking for that because you're talking about how these will win combat a lot when you're Wild Swing.
But if they don't, you don't have to commit. Yes,
totally.
Notably, you can still invalidate them even if they would be 3. They're still an Ultra. You can invalidate them.
Okay, good to know.
So yes, being at 0 cards in hand and 1 gauge and critting is also a really strong state. The issue is when your opponent does something to make that not appealing, you now have 0 cards in hand and you need to solve that problem.
Right, definitely.
So I would rather be at 4 gauge and a lot of cards in hand crit Wild Swinging.
Right, and you don't necessarily want to be spending gauge to draw cards because the way
you need gauge. Yes.
Yeah, the way that the universe works is you're going to draw one of these. You're going to CC4, draw these Ultras, and be like, well, okay, now I can't play them.
Yes. And then there is some tension here. These are great with no cards in your hand. This is worthless with no cards in your hand.
Right.
When you crit, yeah. So, I mean, not literally worthless. You can take the gamble, but I wouldn't.
Right. And you can't wild swing off of this. It specifically says to play a card from your hand.
from your hand.
Right.
So I mean, you do if you want, like you draw a card and play it, so it's like a little bit like wild swinging. If you play this with an empty hand, you have a chance, but it's sad if you have to do that with this card because this card deserves better.
Sure, and you're not getting your crit effect on that drawn card. Like,
no,
yes,
you're not.
It is random, but it's not the kind of random that Dan wants.
Yes. So, okay, notable. I forgot that is a really good point. This only matters with 3 characters in the game. Additional attacks don't have boost applied to them, so you can't put Fierce on a like taunt attack.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
This strike eats up the boost, but does it also eat up my opponent's boost?
If your opponent had a boost that would affect your attack, which is very rare, then it would apply to like taunt instead of your other attack.
Interesting. Okay.
But yeah. So this is 5 damage. It's not. You can't put Fierce on it, but that's okay.
Right.
But just a rules note there.
Right. No, definitely good to know.
So those are like the strongest things you can be doing. Those are what I'm looking to do, aside from just making crits at good times. Okay, fine. This is like, again, the curve is 1 step higher for your opponent. You may not ever actually get there, but your opponent always has to play around it because they don't know either.
Right. Sure.
So those are the strongest things in your kit, probably.
All right. That makes
so our playstyle is we want to do as many of those as we can.
Right. Yeah. Basically, yes. And those are like they are not unplayable things that are strong. There's many ways to get these options and to get your strong options out online. Some of them just involve wild swinging.
Yep.
Okay.
So
oh, I think I'm going to segue into the same thing that you're segueing into, which is game plan.
Yep. So turn 1. You've got one of the best turn 1 lists in the game. Use it.
Yep.
I will not mull for this. I value mulling for wild swing consistency higher. But you have 3 options in it, and this one is one you're going to keep for wild swing consistency anyway.
Right.
And I'll keep this. It's one of the okay ones, so the okay ones I can throw back, I can keep. It'll depend on what I want my hand to look like.
Mm-hmm.
But like this is the one you keep because it's useful turn 1. So turn 1, do something.
Right. Yes. but specifically, probably try to get in right with one of your options, or play your range 4 turn 1 option if you have it.
Yep. Just hit them if you can. If you can't, peek is good. Run is good.
Yep.
Yeah. Do something.
Block on turn 1.
If you're player 1,
is that an option?
You could. You just generally don't need to. You have other ways that
you have too many ways
are better.
To do it. Yep.
But if you didn't have anything better, yeah, go ahead. Block.
Okay.
Your opponent has to play around. Well, okay. Block is filling the same side of this mix-up as this. Yeah. So they can call out the block, but I mean, to be fair, the upside is lower, the downside is also lower. You don't actually take damage. Block is pretty funny for Dan. This is rarely correct because Dan values force a fair bit, values gauge a lot. Nothing on block says you can't keep spending after you've blocked all the damage. So if you have a full hand and you block and for some reason you think that going to an empty hand will just win you the next strike, you can.
That's
Again,
so
not
cool.
recommended, but funny.
Right.
You can do it sometimes.
But like everybody should be filling out that on their Exceed bingo card, right? Someday do that in a game with Dan. That's so funny.
If you want to do that more often, play Enchantress. They share that interaction. Okay. Enchantress does it all the time.
Okay, interesting.
Dan does it very rarely. I don't know if I've done it yet. I probably should.
Yeah, I mean, like that is a teaser. At some point during the season 4 lessons, you will be back on the show talking about Enchantress. I look forward to hearing more about that interaction. That's so cool.
Yep. So, yeah, turn 1, do something, be aggressive. Mm-hmm. It's going to result in you ending at close range. All right. Against like new specifically, I guess you have to run in. Someone who has like a range 4 speed 7 option, you can't do your mix up.
Right.
In that case, run in.
Right. That's very, very rare.
Yeah. Do your mix up. If you can't, run in. And now you're in. you're at range 1 or 2. If you don't have crits, your Wild Swings are okay, but they really want the crits to shine. So if you don't have crits, play slows, play block maybe, play fast, get gauge somehow.
Mhm.
And then once you have gauge, you want to maneuver into like a situation where, again, season 1 to 5 normals, you can just play neutral. You're not bad at, like, you're not as good at it as anyone who's dedicated ability to do it, but you're better at it than probably some season 7 characters and season 6 characters. You're not much worse at it than a fair few season 1 through 5 characters.
Sure. Yeah,
and
I mean,
you
like,
have
these go a long way.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's
so you can play neutral. There's no huge urgency to, oh no, I have no ability to fight in neutral. And then sometimes you get to skip neutral. Sometimes you get to peek and see your crit sweep on top at range 1 or your crit core you on top at range 2.
Right.
Sometimes you get to Psycho Vision and get a free reading. So play neutral, leave yourself open to taking good options. And then that's one line. The other line, based on what things are down, range 1, range 2, Wild Swing. On defense especially, I'll crit Wild Swing very often. If my opponent just strikes into me without a plan, crit Wild Swing, you'll win. Like, shockingly often.
Right.
And then your opponent has lost a strike on their own turn, which is one of the really bad things in this game.
Right, and now it's your turn and you get to set the pace for the next one and keep that going.
Yep. So it's the set play loop, right? It's just a really funky spin on it because you don't actually have set play. You have a higher like baseline of set play before your opponent can strike into you.
You're all, as long as you have a gauge, you always have Swift. You're always a little bit set up.
Yeah. So your opponent has to take that risk to strike into you. You can, if you want, take that risk to strike into them with extra value.
Right.
It's just an option.
Okay.
And then I don't know if I've ever explicitly said this yet. I will crit Wild Swing on defense very often. I will crit Wild Swing on offense specifically when I'm set up and I expect it to be good.
Got it. Okay, that's a really good rule of thumb to keep in mind.
Yep. Luckily, the setup is not super hard. Range 1 and range 2 and a gauge is already pretty good. Range 1 to range 2 and empty hand and a gauge is better. Range 1 to range 2 and 4 gauge is amazing. That's where everything's online.
Okay, so again, going back to the set play idea, you're not when you say setup, you're not talking about I just used peak and I'm going to do it.
That's just a freebie. That's just part of the text of peak secretly.
Right. That isn't what you mean when you say setup. What you mean by setup is in a position that you like with resources that you like, not I have Fierce down and I'm holding these options. Like you're just gonna let that rip at some point on offense.
Yep.
Okay.
So, and reshuffle. Most characters don't have to think about reshuffle. And you're Dan. Sometimes you can just end games really fast, really, really fast, and you don't have to think about reshuffle. But there's a really interesting trade-off late game when your deck is low, because when your deck is low, both of you know what your Wild Swings are. Your opponent also knows what your Wild Swings are.
Right.
And that's a really big deal. And you have the information advantage because you know what's in your hand, and they don't.
Right. Unless you have 0 cards in hand, which you might. But...
Unless you have 0 cards in hand, which you might.
Right.
So you are a little favored in that situation in terms of information. You know that, like, you don't even need to be Dan to do this. If you're another character, you have 3 cards in your deck, and you happen to know that 2 of them are altars. That's a pretty good Wild Swing.
Yeah.
If you have a nice full hand as Dan, and your deck is getting pretty low, you have pretty good ideas what your odds are, and your opponent might not, because your hand might have the other side of all those mix-ups.
Right.
So there is strength to that. There's also the weakness to that of, obviously, again, your opponent knows what you can Wild Swing, and maybe your good options are down.
Right.
Those are 2 things you have to think about a lot.
Because Dan has no kind of recursion or anything. You need to reshuffle to keep your options live, even if that's going to mess with your information of your own options.
Yes, that's exactly the trade-off. You have to think about that a lot. If you don't want to think about it too much, look in your discard. How much of it's red? Is it like 6 of it red? Reshuffle.
Right.
that's the really fast and easy. Don't want to think too much way. But
Yeah, these cards are so threatening. Just bring them back.
so yep.
Okay, awesome. Um, any other sort of I have a few questions that I wanna ask you, and a couple other things that I wanna bring up, but we are at about a little over an hour and a half of awesome Dan conversation. Anything else that you want to add to the lesson plan before I ask you a couple questions and we close it out?
Um, hmm, I feel like okay. Well, since we talked about Enchantress a tiny bit, let's talk about related characters to Dan.
You have that is an incredible segue. I was actually that's one of the two things I was gonna ask about. So please do tell me about related characters.
Um, so I will say Enchantress. I think that's a bit of people. You need to know why it's Enchantress because Enchantress, at a glance, looks very much the opposite of Dan.
Right.
You are a control ranged zoner who has free resources and really low power numbers.
Yeah.
So everything Dan isn't.
None of these things are particularly Dan-like.
But you have the same hand manipulation in your game plans. Enchantress has the mini game constantly of I need to empty my hand, I need to have good things to do. As my hand gets increasingly small, I can't run out of things to do because I'm still stuck there.
Right.
Until I empty my hand. And that's why she likes that block interaction so much. Just like I want a new hand.
So she kind of it has this similar play patterns to Dan, even if her
actual character is very different. Her play patterns, if you like Dan, you might like Enchantress, depending on why you like Dan. I like them both for that reason.
Interesting. And obviously like there are many characters in Exceed who are characters who wild swing.
That was the other set. I just brought up Enchantress first because we already talked about her. But
right. And because she very notably doesn't fit in that set. But then the others are your wild swing folks, which many characters. So please go ahead.
Yep. And there's also a distinction people draw about wild swingers. You have consistency wild swingers, reward wild swingers. Every wild swinger has some of both because if you just don't have any reward, you can't win. If you don't have any consistency, why are you a wild swinger?
Right.
But Dan is a reward wild swinger because you have this card that just misses. You have no real ability to stack your deck more than one turn in advance.
One card deep. And you have 8 power payoffs that beat most things in the game.
Yeah. Right. So you're going to have life gaps and strikes. There's going to be strikes where you win big, strikes where you lose big.
Yep.
And reward wild swingers, I think, are a little rare. That might not be true. Super Skullman in season 1, though I personally do not know the most about him, is the first reward wild swinger.
Yep.
And Leo is the most recent reward wild swinger. And I think those 3 are reward wild swingers. Those 2 and Dan.
Okay.
Leo is interesting. Leo's probably the closest to Dan. He's a reward wild swinger who has interesting hand management. He just does it differently.
Right. So that might be a variation on the same theme.
Yep.
Gotcha.
And then consistency wild swingers, there's Marathi again. Season 1 is before my time. I do not know about him. You have Imogen, and you have Taukaka.
Yep.
And yeah, they're all wide swingers. They fall into those groups because like Imogen, Taukaka, and Marathi and Imogen are just like a kit full of sweep likes, and you go to your preferred range and you play sweep.
Right.
Again, that very high level overview, and these characters I don't know as much about either, so I will not say too much more than that because whoever is going to action to the guide will have way better information than me.
Yep, and we will. I'm looking forward to getting there so I can tell whoever is running that guide all the smack you talked about their characters.
Oh no. And Taukaka has a consistency wild swinger from kind of different direction. Her cards are kind of, I think they're mostly kind of weird and not great, but her ability is just says you hit. And if you don't hit, maybe they don't either.
Right, she can move in and out in interesting ways.
So, and then the reward wild swingers are like they just hit for like 8 power out of nowhere. They blow you up.
Right, and I, like it's worth mentioning one more time, when we say consistency, we're talking about on like a strike by strike basis. Dan is a reward wild swinger who can consistently win games.
Yes,
That's not the consistency
definitely.
that you're talking about. It's that he has to win fewer, and he's less likely to win each interaction in order to close out a win on a game.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Okay.
So yeah, that's like the two other things you might like if you like Dan is you like big red power numbers. There are other characters with big red power numbers. There are too many to list.
Yeah.
But yeah, big red power numbers.
Yeah, but
And
check out Soul Bad Guy. Check out
yep.
check
Polar
out
Knight,
sure.
Equus, whoever.
Yeah, you can definitely find somebody with a lot of red in their kit.
And notably, people with lots of red in their kit, there's a lot of them in this season that Dan's in.
Yep, definitely.
Season 3 characters have a particular feel to them. Dan is a kind of weird one because Dan plays with crits pretty differently than the rest of them do.
Right.
But
this is a very stat-heavy season.
Yep, big red numbers, big mix-ups, big, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Okay. And then I'd say probably the last question that I have, and we've talked sort of around it here and there. We've spent a lot of this lesson discussing Dan things and how Dan does Dan things. I'm Dan's opponent. What am I doing to stop Dan from doing these things? And how are you, as the Dan player, countering my counterplay? Or is that too big a question to ask?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll answer it probably in pieces because it is a big question. And
sure.
I don't, unfortunately, I am the Dan player in most of the matchups I play that involve Dan.
Sure.
But, again, range free. Range free is not a good range for Dan because you can just strike into him and he has to play normals.
Right. His wild swings are not consistent enough.
Yep. How beats Spike, it loses to Assault and Dive.
Right.
Range free is not fun for you as Dan. Unless it's your turn, then you can hit them. But even then, you're just on curve. Like, you have big reward on curve, but you're on curve.
Right.
So go to range free, attack him from there. Set play. Dan, again, like, he can just crit strike into you, he can try, but you this is how you turn the odds in your favor. Dan is like peeking at his deck, he's critting, he's holding gauge and cards in hand to make his altars useful. If you just boost stats, that makes it harder for him to climb that wall.
Right. There's fewer things in his kit that actually successfully beat the stuff that you're threatening when you have more stats.
Yep.
Okay.
And here's what you don't do as Dan's opponent, because don't get cornered with a low hand and Dan with resources. Like, that's when I, as Dan, and I play relatively, like, I don't go ham on the wild swings when I'm playing particularly seriously.
Right.
But if your hand is low and you're in the corner, or like one of those two, or you're out of, like, I don't know, you're above curve option, I can just wild swing into you and crit, and you probably are losing that strike. And I have spent very little to do it.
Right. Okay. So as Dan's opponent, I'm trying to keep out of positions where you can just freely use your ability and not even have to think about it.
Yep. Because like, if I crit wild swing into you and you wild swing, most characters, you're very likely to lose.
Sure.
And I've spent a gauge, and I got the gauge back. I'm exactly where I started. I can do it again.
Right. And I'm worse where I started because I'm down 5 life, or I don't know, 8 life, or a lot of life.
And then let's say you don't wild swing and that happens. Now you're down cards. You have to prepare because you wasted cards.
Yep.
It's even worse for you. But I, again, didn't spend any cards. I can just keep doing it as long as I keep winning.
Yep.
There's no need for me to prepare.
Yep. And
don't run out of resources at a bad time.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So that's when you suddenly go rush down, is when you have a chance to pounce. And you just chain as many attacks as they can together to deprive them of resources.
Another related one is, like, if your hand is relatively full and I just attack you and you wild swing, I'm like, you would not have anything in your hand that's good at this range. And I do it again, and I just start crit wild swinging.
I better stay at this range until you show me that you have some kind of answer.
So, like, maybe change cards? I'm not super sure. Change cards, boost, do something that changes the situation. Don't just sit in a bad
Don't
situation
just
because,
yeah, definitely.
yeah.
So now I'm your opponent. I'm using set play. I'm boosting around. I'm staying at range 3. I'm
You're striking at range 3 specifically if you
striking
can.
at
You're
range
trying
3.
to.
Yes. I'm staying out of situations where you are dominatingly powerful over me to keep you from being able to just wild swing for free. What are you as Dan doing to stop that counterplay? That like kind of the third part of the rock paper scissors triangle here.
Yep. This is the fail case where I just have to play like neutral with my decent season 1 to 5 neutral boosts.
Right.
Couple of good options. Dan can play neutral. Good range 4 mix up, safe range 4 and 5, safe defenses at range 1 and 2. I don't get to win for free. I have to play the game.
Okay.
And maybe your character is a little better at it than I am, but not crushingly better at it.
Okay. And they're as soon as they falter in that neutral play, you have a really strong upside.
Yes.
Gotcha. Okay.
This is a much more micro thing. Don't lose to Haugadoken for free.
Yep.
But remember it exists. This is a robbery altar. These are all robbery altar. Well, this one's not because you know you're going to lose to it.
Right.
But this comes out crit and you just take 8. This comes out and you weren't paying attention. You just take 7.
Right.
So, like, be aware of what loses to Haugadoken, at least. If you might have to obviously play the mix-up sometimes, but don't forget that it's a mix-up. Don't forget that it might not even be a mix-up if you're down assaults.
Right. Yeah, it might just be free damage for Dan.
Yeah. So that's a much more micro thing, but
well, I mean,
it's shocking how many cards this game wins.
How micro can 7 damage be? Like that's
this
more
is a fourth of your life.
Yeah, that's almost a lot of your life.
Other than that, I mean,
I'm sure that this is a conversation that necessarily has to go beyond the scope of this video, right?
Yeah.
Like what I'm asking you is like, okay, so we've talked about his kit, we've talked about his game plan. Now tell me every other possible thing about Dan. like that's too much, obviously, but that's incredibly useful information, and obviously, this is stuff that gets developed as you become more experienced with Dan. This is more than enough to get people started on this.
Oh, and text this.
Oh, yeah.
Text this card. It's really annoying to have this card text because
yeah.
people forget to text this card. It doesn't look as scary as it is. They're like, oh, I can just survive a turn of Slake's Glory. And then 1 turn turns into 2 turns, turns into 3 turns. And I'm up 3 gauge and you're down 15 life. And that's really hard to come back from.
And you're feeling pretty good about yourself.
Because, like, if this card stays a bit, I don't need this card anymore. I have gauge and, like, it's already done its purpose.
Right. You don't need it. You don't need it anymore now that you've got 2-3 gauge out of it.
Yep.
Right.
So tech it as early as you can, unless you have like surprise EXs from hand are good. Do something. Win the strike in a way that's more reliable than hoping, or tech it.
Right, or just tech it.
Yep.
Right, that makes sense. I feel like that is, and I mean, like, this is the Dan guide. Dan's opponents. Yep. Like, go to your own guide. Learn how to play your character.
Yes, but, play your character. Yeah, play your character well. Because Dan doesn't do anything too great. It's not like I don't know, who's someone who like doesn't play the game. Merkava or someone. He's not. He plays the game. You just play the game well on your side. Right. Beat him in trades where you can.
Right. And the reason that I bring up counterplay at all is that the Dan player needs to be aware of that counterplay in order to play around it. So everybody watching this guide to try to learn how to beat Dan, focus on your character too.
Yes. Parry legendary taunt.
Sure. Yep. Good to know. Those are your targets.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, I think that's just about it.
Yeah. Any closing thoughts on Dan? You have, I think, done a lot to convince me that this character is worth my time. Not a character I've ever really looked twice at, and I'm excited to give him a try now.
Yeah, I'll go wrap it back around to the beginning. Uh, One of the things I like about Dan, like one of the reasons Dan was my main for a really long time, is my main. Um, you can just pull out Dan, and you can play Dan into whoever
Right.
because you have a lot of silly lines as well. Your serious lines look like silly lines sometimes. Your silly lines look like serious lines. You can just. It's like D always says about Imogen. Like your opponent doesn't feel too bad that they're losing. Dan doesn't have the same thing going on because Dan wins strikes crushingly.
Right.
But it's funny when Dan wins strikes. You're like, okay, you just got lucky there.
Right.
And sometimes Dan loses straight. Like it's there's a lot of room for
It's like slapstick.
yeah,
Like
exactly. And
like
there's also creative stuff you can do as Dan. You can boost secret technique. You can just like exceed and walk at your opponent one space at a time because you keep wanting to keep one card in hand. You can boost lucky and place a card on in your hand on top of your deck that doesn't win at your current range and hope. And then it'll look amazing when it works.
yeah.
If it works.
Yeah, and it probably won't, but if it does, yeah, I mean, like that is more the fantasy of Dan's character. I feel like the fact that he can also win tournament games is in some ways like a cool, very cool, like afterthought. That yeah, he's
Yep.
also great, but he's a real big goofball and he's a lot of fun to play, and that's important too.
Yep. So yeah, just give in to the wild swings. Just go to Rage 1, just see what happens. If you want to, play Slot Machine. So yeah. Dan is great. You can play him seriously, you can play him silly. Your opponent doesn't have to know what you're doing if you are playing a newer player, for instance, and you don't want to discourage them by beating them up.
Sure.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, big red numbers fun.
Yep, absolutely. That's what we're all here for. All right. Rose, thank you so much
Yeah, thank you.
for this awesome guide. It was a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to having you back for a couple other characters later on. Um, everybody else, I'm looking forward to seeing a sudden uptick in Dan representation in tournaments. Please play this character; he seems really cool. And I will see you all later on another guide. And Rose, thank you, and I will talk to you later as well.
Yep, take care.
Yep. Bye, everybody.